Avalanche by Dr. Brugh Joy, Chapter 9. Doing the opposite of what we think we ought to be doing. One disturbing way that we encounter certain unconscious aspects of our own beingness is through the experience of having made up our mind that we are not going to do something: overeat, smoke cigarettes, drink alcohol, snort cocaine, watch television, take sleeping medications, drink diet beverages, engage in casual sex. All of the usual New Year resolutions, large and small, and then observing ourselves doing exactly what we said we wouldn't do. From that perspective, we are exploring in this book. We needn't postulate possession or the influence of some demon-like entity, although we may feel as if there truly is a demon inside. We simply have to remind ourselves that we are more selves to ourself than just the self we know. Okay, first self is capital S, second self is small s, and I'm going to read that sentence again. We simply have to remind ourselves that there are more selves to ourself than just the self that we know about. When we have not taken these other selves into consideration, particularly those which are not in accord with our New Year's resolution self, we can be overly moral and overly disciplined, and yet we begin to find out how powerful they can be. If the dominant unconscious aspects do not wish to participate in what the conscious mind is undertaking, they will undermine and eventually thwart any attempt, any vow, any resolution, any determination to change. In such a situation, our best course of action is to observe what is being satisfied through the undisciplined and unacceptable activity. It may be nourishment needs, sublimated sexuality, punishment, redemption dynamics, or self-rejection patterns, to mention but a few of the unconscious forces that operate in every individual to some degree. Always, and I do mean always, there will be a child, capital C, or an infant, capital I, self, that seeks immediate emotional, sexual, or physical gratification. And this self, which is far deeper and more powerful than the usual outer sense of self, will be usurping the desires of the conscious self in order to satisfy its own desires. We should remember that these are unconscious aspects, operating independently, having a life of their own, and seeking fulfillment regardless of what the rational outer area of consciousness has to say or to recommend. This then offers us some idea of why so many of our resolves are, for the most part, destined to fail. We simply have not appreciated nor understood our fuller dynamics. To emphasize this point, I note that we cannot even remember our own name if the unconscious does not want to deliver up that information. We also need to remember that the unconscious selves involved in these processes are different from the neurological structures and functions that form the equipment through which both the conscious and the unconscious selves express. In contemporary computer language, the hardware, the neurological system, is not the same as the software, the patterns of the selves. In dealing with the inability to recall one's own name, the problem could indeed be due to a hardware deficit, but the problem I'm addressing would be in the software and how the parts of the self, the independent selves, are interfacing and interacting with one another. There is literally nothing the conscious self can make happen, either in the external world or in the internal world, without the support from the larger community existing in the unconscious. In fact, few of us would want to become aware of how really vulnerable and tenuous the conscious self and its feelings of power, autonomy, and control really are. From self-observation, as well as from observing hundreds and hundreds of individuals struggling with defiant, unconscious, self-destructive selves, I have come to believe that these selves are usually activated when we fail to take action, when we fail to make necessary changes in our lives, when we fail to give birth to a more mature self to handle the stage of life that we are currently experiencing, or when we fail to begin appropriate, deeper unfoldment that might bring us into a more profound contact with spirit and the ultimate mystery of beinghood. Thus, like the demons of war, one's self-destructive aspects can serve to force change. They break up the ordinary lifestyles, routing one into eventual chaos, suffering, and new possibilities, if one can survive the initiation. They can also orchestrate reality to bring about the fulfillment of deeply desired ends, even when that involves one's own death. I'm going to read that again. They can also orchestrate reality to bring about the fulfillment of deeply desired ends, even when that involves one's own death. An anecdote illustrating this point was related to me by a close friend. His father, who was 67, had an abrupt onset of a hemorrhage from a duodenal ulcer. He was rushed to the hospital where he was not evaluated by a physician for nearly 12 hours. Over the next week, every complication one could imagine transpired, culminating in fluid overload, cardiac failure, and pulmonary embolus, leading to death. In consideration of the incompetence of the physician and the mismanagement by the hospital, an exceedingly strong case could have been marshaled for suit. This was considered, but the underlying dynamics were all too evident to my friend and his family. This man's life, following the death of his wife of 45 years, had been filled with bouts of heavy drinking and near calamitous automobile accidents. He had no substantial positive image about the future, despite his statements about wanting to enjoy life and to find a new relationship. His behavior reflected the opposite intent. My friend knew his father wanted to die, though he also recognized that his father was not conscious of this intention most of the time. The son could only marvel at how his father managed to pick people and places that cooperated so fully in his demise. The unconscious is extraordinary in its capacity to orchestrate events in outer reality to achieve its ends. Equally self-destructive inner selves, although not ordinarily sensed as such by either the individual or by the collective, are those which represent perfect models of what, according to religion and or society, one's life should be. From an expanded perspective, individuals being lived by these selves are essentially automatons who are deeply comatose and not even close to awakening into the greater possibilities of their beinghood. I'm going to read that sentence again. From an expanded perspective, individuals being lived by these selves are essentially automatons who are deeply comatose and not even close to awakening into the greater possibilities of their beinghood. They almost always accept society's values without a single reservation or question, as long as the conforming self does not move too far away from the supporting structure of the family and the society that propagate the value system. That individual will never know what has been missed or sacrificed in exchange for his or her being in the esteem of the parental forces, as those forces are reflected through the family, religion, or society itself. What always lurks under such behavior is the need to be loved and accepted, an immense need to which all other possibilities that might undermine it are sacrificed. Despite the fact that those other possibilities hold the promise of the person's engaging life in more fulfilling ways. Even if these individuals discover their self-sacrificing behavior and seek to express the fullness of their beinghood, they are frequently overwhelmed by fears of rejection and loss of esteem. Their sense of inferiority-based self-value and capital S self-value is so atrophic that little chance exists for them to make the needed leaps in development and maturation. They have sold their soul for love and acceptance. Attempting to resolve the problem of a dominant infant self through increased discipline of the outer awareness is the least effective course of action that we can take. Attempting to resolve the problem of a dominant infant self through increased discipline of the outer awareness is the least effective course of action we can take. What is required, following self-observation, to ascertain the needs that are being satisfied by the infantile patterning is the activation of more mature, unconscious aspects of self to take charge of the psyche. This is different from the activation of the mature, appearing outer sets of self. The latter is superficial, while the former is substantial and transforming. The induction of more mature aspects of one's unconscious psyche is accomplished through applying material we have covered in previous chapters, including ritual, role modeling, and crisis. I can't count the number of times I've heard people relate their life story, then after its basing patterns are called to their attention, discover their life is a constantly repeating sequence of events they are apparently helpless to change. This isn't true just for a few neurotics. It is true for anybody who cares or dares to engage pattern-level consciousness and read in quotes, the material for herself or himself. This is demonstrated most clearly and most commonly when a person has had 2 or more marriages or long-term intimate relationships. Most people are shocked to find out that in their first marriage, they married the pattern carried by their counter-gender parent. They will also continue to do so in subsequent marriages until the parent-child relationship in their unconscious are made conscious and other more mature aspects of the self are birthed. These more mature or adult selves have far greater resources to engage the powerful forces manifested through the marital relationship. My informal impression at this time is that in most, if not all, first marriages, both partners at unconscious levels have transferred the necessary incestuous bonding between the infant child and the counter-gender parent to the marital partner. There may be other reasons for a relationship between two particular individuals, but if the initial aspects of the relationship included anything closely resembling falling in love, the incestuous parent-child aspects are surely present. I, therefore, call the first marriage the teaching marriage. We can usually help with the individuals who are experienced in the dynamics of the unconscious, learn from the relationship, and prepare to enter a richer possibility of marriage, either with the same partner or with a new partner. However, until the infantile aspect that is operating, usually unconsciously seeking the original mother or father, is integrated with a larger, more mature sense of self, so distinct from a more mature outer sense of self, the forces that may eventually disrupt the first marriage will lead to a second attempt at marriage with exactly the same infantile patterns operating. Then this will be followed by a third marriage, and so on. All the while, the individual who is suffering the pain of these multiple failed relationships is thinking that he or she is a mature adult, acting responsibly and completely unaware of the revolving door dynamics, is bewildered by the turn of events in which each marriage or relationship I'm going to read this sentence again. Let's see, where does it start? However, until the infantile aspect that is operating, usually unconsciously seeking the original mother or father, is integrated with a larger or more mature sense of self, the forces that may eventually disrupt the first marriage will lead to a second attempt at marriage with exactly the same infantile patterns operating. Then this will be followed by a third marriage, and so on, all the while the individual who is suffering the pain of these multiple failed relationships is thinking that he or she is a mature adult, acting responsibly and completely unaware of the revolving door dynamics, is bewildered by the turn of events in each marriage or relationship. When we realize how ignorant the partners in most marriages are of the unconscious aspects active in them, we are surprised that marriages today stand only a 1 in 3 chance of survival. In all likelihood, if the unconscious reasons for marriage were ever to be completely revealed, marriage as we experience it in our culture would collapse. Of course, whether we recognize it or not, this is what is already happening. A change in family structure is clearly underway as our collective works creatively to adapt to a changing world and changing values. Whether we recognize it or not, this is what is already happening. A change in family structure is clearly underway as our collective works creatively to adapt to a changing world and changing values. We may even be reactivating the process of collective child rearing, doing so in ways beyond those presently being explored in our educational systems. The pattern in which the child aspect of an adult attempts to marry his or her countergender parent makes sense to the outer mind when we realize how powerful and incestuous the original parent-child bondings are. For instance, the bonding of the mother with a son or of the father with a daughter often transcends the spousal relationship in depth and intensity. I have encountered situations where the true marriage was, psychologically speaking, between the parent and the offspring. When such unconscious incestuous dynamics exist, They are usually very difficult to access because of their forbidden or taboo quality. And so, since this kind of unconscious, incestuous relationship is so completely disowned and denied by our society, and because of the degree to which we abhor knowledge of it, we might suspect that it constitutes one of the most powerful unconscious individual and collective forces in our psyche. And it does, for reasons that are perfectly understandable when we consider the importance of procreation to life. When unhappy infantile selves are in charge of selecting a marital partner, the stage is set for the activation of powerful unconscious destructive forces within the marriage. For example, although our society tends to view children as innocent and highly destructive impulses, tends to view children as innocent of highly destructive impulses, unintegrated childhood rage is probably the most common unconscious factor present in marital violence. Unintegrated childhood rage is probably the most common unconscious factor present in marital violence. There are individuals who, because of unconscious infantile rage, usually directed at one parent, marry with the unconscious intention to punish that parent. The person's deeper psyche does not care that the marital partner is not the actual parent. It reads the pattern of the marital partner, and if it detects sufficient equivalence, it acts as if the partner is the parent and responds accordingly. Isn't that interesting? A rare but remarkable, formidable, recurrent version of this pattern occurs in marital relationships wherein a partner experiences the death of two or more spouses, either through disease or accident. The statistical odds of an early death in marital relationship are low, but when the death of a second or even third or fourth spouse occurs, the statistical odds are beyond anything close to mere chance, and an underlying pattern that dominates reality must be considered. In such cases, powerful destructive unconscious patterns related to the selection of relationship with and ultimate demise of a marital partner often reveal themselves either in dreams or through projection. The person unconsciously intends to punish and actually helps precipitate at an unconscious level the death of the spouse. The deaths may be due to illness or they may be due to accidents. In either case, the dark child lurks in the partner who is unconsciously orchestrating the events surrounding the deaths. And from what I observe in conference participants, the people who become the victims of such dark children are not innocent of what happens to them. When the unconscious patterns that have produced multiple relationships or marriages are revealed, and awareness of them is accepted, no matter how humiliating or infantile this material may be, the most miraculous possibility emerges, which is that the individual can begin the deeper journey into integration. He or she experiences a sense of euphoria and relief. The resolution does not come from healing the dark child. It lies in the full acceptance by the person of this dark aspect and of the part it played in his or her life. A dominant, mature self then has the opportunity to appear and to take the mantle of living life. Take up the mantle of living life, while the immature selves, though still present, become less active in the unconscious. This is the critical difference between the therapeutic approaches that attempt to heal or to deny the disturbing aspect, and those that recognize the importance of the disturbing aspect and integrate it into the larger sense of self. The task of integrating destructive cells is vastly easier when we realize that these aspects are but patterns of forces, forever struck, eternal, dancing each generation from the distant past through the present and into the distant future. Part of the mystery of life, part of the hand dealt, and they serve life. This next section is entitled The Problem of the Many Selves in Marriage. In dealing with the larger implications and manifestations of a material relationship, most of us are naive, still thinking we are but one gender, the outer gender. But in the crucible of marriage and its crises, we can discover inner selves of both genders and of all ages, constructive and destructive. If we wish to begin to acknowledge which males and females exist within us unconsciously, all we have to do is look around and note those males and females who surround us in the outer world. For the outer world reality reflects the inner unconscious reality. This correspondence holds true everywhere and will be especially noticeable in the family and in the workplace. Further, if we wish to see some of the less ego-enhancing male selves or female selves that exist in us at an unconscious level, all we have to do is describe the kind of men or women we simply cannot stand to be around. Doing this exercise is especially revealing, as we are able to see parts of the self, capital S, that are particularly difficult to associate with our ordinary Doing this exercise is especially revealing, as we are able to see parts of the self that are particularly difficult to associate with our ordinary conscious sense of self. While we are discussing marriage, we should examine the mechanism of falling in love and recognize that it is actually a projection of a beloved, unconscious, inner countergender self. What appears to happen is that the individual who comes closest to this unconscious aspect of self suddenly becomes the one and only, the soulmate, the beloved, without whom one can scarcely consider living. An unsettling revelation is that the countergender beloved carries a pattern of forces that any one of many, many individuals could also have matched. In other words, when the time comes to fall in love, the unconsciously held internal beloved is activated, and literally anybody who even remotely resembles this highly charged inner figure becomes the screen onto which we project the beloved. No wonder we can wake up 6 weeks later, confused. When we are in the grips of projecting a countergender beloved, there is no talking us out of our feelings. We feel as if the world had suddenly become magical and meaningful. We have a purpose, and we feel alive. The mysterious process of the attraction and the union of opposites is powerfully weaving its forces, and the potential resolution to the tension is to create a new life in the form of a child and or a sense of adult wholeness centered in the marital relationship. Adult is an interesting word. Although it has its roots in a Latin word that means coming to maturity, I like thinking of it as a combination of ad, meaning motion toward or nearness to, and alt, from the same root as the word ultimate, thus near or toward the ultimate. The mature adult self, in a relationship such as in a marriage, is capable of sacrificing the sense of independent self and the earlier child and adolescent selves in order to blend with the partner to form a union that transcends either partner's sense of self, a union that moves toward the ultimate. One partner does not sacrifice to the other partner. Rather, in their experience together of life through the marital relationship, both give up their sense of independence to become something greater than either could be alone. To compound our insights into the marital relationship, we must recognize that there are also aspects of selves. Now, that there are also aspects or selves in both partners. To compound our insights into the marital relationship, we must recognize that there are also aspects or selves in both partners that can, will, and ought to act independently of the marriage. What has come into being through marriage is the added experience of oneness through shared creativity. What has not been brought about by the marriage is the loss of those selves in either partner that do not or cannot experience life through the marital blending. As we come to understand the unconscious and multitudinous aspects of self in each person, I believe we will no longer attempt to control the destiny of individuals through requiring that marriage somehow be the avenue to total self-expression and self-fulfillment. From this perspective, we can appreciate how exceedingly unlikely it is for one man or one woman to find relationship fulfillment through the marriage partner alone. I used to believe marriage had to be defined in terms of, among other things, sexual commitment to a single individual. If the sexual experience was not contained in the relationship, it wasn't a marriage. It was another kind of relationship, but it wasn't a marriage. Now I've come to doubt that human being is intrinsically monogamous. Monogamy feels to me like an ideal superimposed on reality, or a defense against the forces beyond the control of the rational and intellectual selves. Ample evidence exists that the human being functions very well in polygamous social settings. In societies such as those in Italy, which have withdrawn civil sanctions against divorce, multiple sexual relationships are freely explored. Of course, these relationships were going on all the time anyway. Our mouths, under the control of the mind, say one thing, while our bodies go right ahead and live the suchness of life. I am further deepening my understanding of the mystery of marriage to the point of recognizing that a mature marriage may not have its basis in procreative sexuality at all. The reason of a mature marriage is that the relationship be one within both partners, in which both partners surrender personal identity to the beinghood that ensues from the blending of the two individuals. This is the outer form of the mystical marriage, and is not contingent on the procreative aspect of either individual. Neither, in fact, is it contingent on the gender of the individuals. This means that two men, two women, or a group of men or group of women can enter a true marriage of the spirit, one that may transcend the genital marriage ordinarily sanctioned by society. Any combination is possible, and within same-gender marriages, sexuality may or may not be part of the commitment toward a transcending union. If this shocks people, they simply do not understand such things as the mystical marriage to Christ that both men and women enter into with the vows that are taken in nunhoods and priesthoods. Nor do they really fathom the mystical writings about the beloved in either the Sufi tradition or the Christian tradition. Similar situations are encountered in brotherhoods and sisterhoods where a transcendental union of souls is experienced without the requirement for the explicit expression of the procreative forces at the genital level. Contemplating this entire phenomena truly leads to one of the deepest mysteries a human being can encounter: the inner mystical marriage, or the union of the masculine and feminine forces of the unconscious to produce a new transcendent being, a single whole. Other reasons for marriage may be those that involve the procreation of children and nothing more, or they may involve security needs and have little to do with children or sexuality. I know people who only wanted to beget children, to bear children, or to rear children, and who are married to the person who is nearest or most available for that purpose. Or other relationships external to the legally sanctioned marriage may actually involve the exploration of a mature experience of marriage, while the marriage itself satisfies unconscious, infantile, and adolescent patterns. All the issues about loyalty in marriage seem to me to be nothing more than mechanisms of control. It is often easier to behave than to assume the responsibility for one's greater beinghood. Anytime we find ourselves taking a special vow of total commitment, the unconscious is certain to erupt at some later time in an attempt to balance what can never be balanced through such a vow. As powerful as guilt and sanctions are, the unconscious will not tolerate those limitations to the expression of life. All is well if the marriage actually does contain the patterns for fulfillment, but if the relationship is only one of several stagings, marriage can act as a trap rather than a threshold to later relationships. People die of cancer from such traps. This is particularly true when the individual lacks the maturity to move against the outer containment, and when such a containment becomes evident. People die of cancer from such traps. This is particularly true when the individual lacks the maturity to move against the outer containment, if and when such containment becomes evident. Obviously, it is possible to have a genital relationship in a mature marriage with but one individual. This still does not mean that even a majority of the needs of both partners can be fulfilled within the marriage. It is also possible to have a mature marriage with one individual and simultaneously a genital relationship with another individual. What profound unhappiness occurs when we try to force our greater beingness into little definitions of relationship and marriage. And this next section is entitled Marriage is a Spiritual Path. In great contrast to the perception I held but a few years ago that marriage was an encumbrance to spiritual development, I now believe that marriage is one of the great paths to spiritual development and self-realization. At that time, I felt all individuals could and should access transcendental awakening along the lines followed by spiritual teachers, gurus, priests, and priestesses. I felt that a person could not reach spiritual enlightenment while still in a marriage. One would either not marry or would wait until the children had been raised before any degree of spiritualization could come about. This perspective represented an unconscious spiritual bias on my part, one embedded in esoteric teachings that defended against sexuality, emotionality, and physicalness. The moment I apprenticed myself to a most heretical teacher, life with a capital L, I recognized my previous position as having been a prejudice of the masculine psyche, the illumined mind, I then considered the fact that advanced teachers and saints have been influencing the populations of India, China, and the Middle East and Europe for millennia, still despite the incessant churning of prayer wheels for thousands of years. The collective prayers of the faithful chanted at Easter and Christmas and the arrival and departure of those held to be God, the fundamental patterns of life, have renewed themselves from generation to generation. Little, if any, in the basic nature of humanity has come about as a result of people being exposed to these heightened beings. Chaos comes and chaos goes. The priesthoods maintain the same relative position and influence in the human social order as they always have. The gods, the litanies, the chants, and the garments may change, but the relationship and significance of the priesthoods to the totality of life does not. This is because the eternal spiritual aspects of life lie behind all manifestation and all action. The unawakened and the awakened are both part of the larger wholeness that cannot be seen through the separating filters of the rational, logical, and intellectual consciousness. Those who don't spin the prayer wheels and those who are both immortal aspects, those who don't spin the prayer wheels and those who do are both immortal aspects of the choreography of life. Together they reflect the mystery, and neither are apart from it. Excuse me. The idea that spiritual fulfillment must be achieved as the spiritual teacher has achieved it may simply not be valid. The perspective I am currently exploring is that all aspects of life are pathways to spiritual fulfillment, and that a spiritual teacher and the teacher's attributes merely reflect one's particular path and not the path. The spiritual teacher is only one very small part of the entity called the collective self. Just as the body contains the crucially important central nervous system with its brain and spinal cord, it also contains other vital parts: heart, lungs, kidneys, skin, digestive tract, and so on. Were these parts to be given voice, the central nervous system would not declare its particular way of functioning and style of being to be the full and only pathway to proper physical functioning, nor would the anal cells claim to be waiting around to become central nervous system cells in another lifetime. Anal cells would know that they are part of the miracle of life and have just as important a task as do the central nervous system cells. As anybody knows, when something goes wrong with an anal cell, we would be in definite trouble if an anal cell tried to become a brain cell, or if a brain cell tried to become an anal cell. All the organ systems and all the cells of every organ system of the entire body must carry out their particular function and do so in harmony with every other system for the full potential of the physical body to be realized. Likewise, the entire psyche, with all its vehicles of consciousness, from the most deplored to the most revered, is required for the self to realize itself. And then it says in brackets, this very concept is reflected in the Bible in 1 Cor, which is Corinthians 12, 14, 27, as John Niendorf noted in his editorial review of the manuscript. End bracket. And remember that this self to which I am referring is not to be equated with the illumined mind or with the heightened awareness of spiritual teachers. So when I refer to the self realizing itself, I do not mean the outer senses of self. Even the illumined mind realize the self. They do not and cannot fully and experientially becoming what one fundamentally is. And I have come to believe what one is determined during the moment of conception, when the mystery underlying life and matter exerts its most profound influence and expresses its needs with each individual, is the most natural mode by which each of us will come in to our portion of spiritual realization. And that does not mean each of us is to be a central nervous system cell and attain this realization through the brain cell pathway. Rather, each one of us contributes a part to the realization, with no single aspect by itself, through its own filter, being capable of the realization of the full mystery. Full realization of the mystery requires the fullest incarnation of all its parts. This means that all the various life patterns that have been dancing the human being since its emergence from the void will continue to dance the human being until the life cycles of our species concludes. Each individual reaches relative realization by being fully what each is. One contemporary viewpoint, for example, holds that the entire world is conscious, living, being, called Gaia, and that its constituent parts are all aspects of it, including the basic chemical elements, viruses, bacteria, insects, trees, plants, sea life, animals, and human beings. From this perspective, we see a profound example of how humanity is only one aspect of the wholeness and the mystery of life. Humanity may represent the central nervous system of Gaia, but humanity is not the totality. With this understanding that humanity is only one aspect of life, we can better understand why each individual within humanity represents only a path and not the path to wholeness. For instance, only those individuals who are struck at conception to carry the attributes of the spiritual teacher are destined to reflect the teacher aspect of life and to undergo training to receive the appropriate empowerment. Others will be initiated into those myriad of other aspects of life that are required for life to fulfill itself. This means that everything we see everywhere is actually part of the totality, with purpose, a part to play, and a right to be here, to exist. This includes individuals who haven't the highest intention of awakening to a vaster beinghood, who will never question who they are or why they are. Indeed, everyone does have a part to play. You can see this most strikingly in individuals who, through the simplicity of their presence and action, achieve a transcendence through just being fully what they are. They may be rare, but when you run across such a person, you can never forget that moment. This first came powerfully to my attention when I was having lunch at a hotel in Kona on the big island of Hawaii. I looked over the shoulder of my luncheon guest and into a large, spacious garden and was suddenly overwhelmed by what I saw. I saw a Japanese gardener watering the plants. But I didn't just see a man watering some plants, performing his duty to earn a living. I saw a most incredible fusion of the man watering and the plants. It was a harmonious symphony of interrelationship which I had never experienced prior to that time. The man, the water, and the plants were in perfect accord, each a part of spiritual realization. The man was fulfilling his beinghood by being fully what he was. The essence of such an experience is hard to communicate, as it is more than merely objective. Rather, one's intuition senses when such an action is transpiring, when each part of a process is being fully what it is meant to be. One's heart pounds with delight, and one's eyes fill with tears upon the recognition of a person who has fully realized and accepted the part he or she plays in the mystery of life. I have been privileged to experience this phenomena at other times. The second such encounter occurred when I was observing a local guide who was revealing the mysteries of the ancient city of Monte Alban near Oaxaca. I don't know how to pronounce this. Oaxaca, Mexico. He considered himself a guardian of the ruins and had the most amazing depth of knowledge about the structures and the people whose creation created them. His whole life was fulfilled in the projection and the care of this sacred site. When he spoke, a listener was transported out of time and into the inner experience behind the guide's words. He wasn't talking about ruins. He was the spirit of the ruins. The third such encounter was in Japan, while I was visiting a Zen temple. I was traveling with 11 other men, and we were appreciating what it was to travel as a band of spiritual brothers, pilgrims on a spiritual journey to remote and exotic religious centers in Asia. The third such encounter was in Japan, while I was visiting a Zen temple. I was traveling with 11 other men, and we were appreciating what it was to travel as a band of spiritual brothers, pilgrims, on a spiritual journey to remote and exotic religious centers in Asia. The abbot of the zendo was rotund and boyish. He laughed as he motioned us to step over a large, ornately braided rope that defined the territory of that sacred altar, and he encouraged us to touch and hold the ancient statuary, brass bowls and drums in that area of the temple. "Just objects," he exclaimed. My heart melted into liquid light. The fourth time was while Hannah Veary, Veary, the Hawaiian elder, was teaching me about the various uses for certain of Hawaii's indigenous plants. I recognized that when Nana, as she is called by her family and friends, walks in nature, she is indistinguishable from nature. There is about her a naturalness and reverence for life that cannot be put into words. She responds to nature, and nature responds to her. To state it simply, her consciousness is not localized in her body. The fifth occasion was while I was experiencing a Catholic priest celebrate communion at a Benedictine monastery near Lucerne Valley, California. His name was Brother Luke. He didn't know me, and I didn't know him. I later learned from a television interview that he had been raised as a Lutheran and received his medical degree from the University of Southern California, was attracted to this high desert monastery near the community of Pear Blossom, and in very short time embraced the Catholic religion and took the vows of monasticism. His reason for conversion was that he was spiritually moved by the rituals of this religion. As I am not a Catholic, I was not able to take communion the day he psycho-spiritually changed the bread and wine into the symbolic body and blood of Christ. But I didn't need to be Catholic to experience that what Brother Luke invoked during that most remarkable ritual. Though I had observed Mass many times, never had I experienced a priest transubstantiate as well as transfigurate as did Brother Luke. I also recognized this fusion of an individual with his or her essence while sharing an early morning walk in the fall-leafed woods in the Cotswolds of southern England with Sir George Trevelyan. Sir George, who was in his 80s, was transfixed by an ancient and sacred tree. Its vast roots, the sweeping upsurge of a massive gnarled trunk, and the cathedral-like arching branches. In that moment, I couldn't tell where Sir George left off and the tree began. Finally, to bring this discussion full circle, I make note of two individuals I know who are so merged in their marriage that the transcendental qualities to which I have been referring are overwhelmingly reflected in their day-to-day interaction with each other and with their friends. Their marriage is their spiritual path. In the kinds of situations I have cited here, an individual is fully and completely in accord with the way he or she truly is. An intuitional or psychic impression would reveal complete equivalence between the person's innermost self and his or her outer nature. There is no mask. The psyche of the individual is completely at peace, aligned with its parts, the individual fulfills his or her destiny and obligation to life through the simplicity of being who or what he or she is. One experiences a most wondrous inner appreciation for individuals who are reflecting to the fullest what they have come to express. It makes no difference whether they are ditch diggers, automobile mechanics, computer whizzes, book editors, short order cooks, prostitutes, mercenaries, nuns, monks, physicians, hitmen for the mafia, gurus, or television evangelists. One doesn't have to experience one's life in the same way someone else does, or even if one feels inspired and uplifted by that person, one can continue to discover one's own unique combination of resources, which helps to bring the mystery itself into realization. And that concludes chapter 9. Oh, that was beautiful and profound. Wow. Okay, chapter 10 is entitled Non-Ordinary States of Consciousness and the Unconscious. Okay, I can hardly wait. Till soon.